We also have wonderful commissioned deputies that we work with, and I'll tell you something, they are so concerned about the scams because when they have to go take a report and some lady has lost $20,000 or some gentleman that could be their grandfather or their grandmother has lost $30,000, they get really upset because they know how hard we have worked for our money and they know what it takes to get where we are. And they know that they can't do anything about it because it is shipped overseas, it's gone. So they really appreciate what we call community policing. This is a scam, the definition of a scam, and I don't call them scammers. I think that's way too nice. I call them slime balls, sleaze balls, scuzzbags. And what they really are con artists, and they are really, really, really good at it. They are professionals, and they've been doing this for a long time. One of the latest is a lady received a call, Grandma, I've been in a car accident, and I need money for the hospital. Well, hello, that's scary. But they keep coming up with new scams all of the time. And the sergeant told me one day, she said, now think about this, Lou. If your house were burglarized, and they stole your computer, they stole your TV, they stole some jewelry, maybe they steal your car. There's a chance that would be found. You would make a police report, maybe some of that property would be found. If it's not found, maybe insurance will cover part of that. But if you lose money to one of these scams, it's gone. So that's a good thing to remember. This is the first recorded scam I could come up with. 1588, so these guys have been around forever and they're not going anyplace. If they weren't making any money, they wouldn't do it. Now in 1588, what the story was, and I don't know how the word got out, maybe carrier pigeons, something like that, I don't know. But there was a man in the dungeon, in the king's castle in the dungeon, and he knew where the treasure was hidden. And the king wanted to know where the treasure was, and this guy wouldn't tell him, so the king put him in the dungeon. But if you would just give him a certain amount of money, he could bribe the guard, and he'd get out, and he'd share the treasure with you. Doesn't that sound good? Well, this has been going on so long, and I can tell you about a story, a lady about 15 years ago in Green Valley, a banker was telling me this. There was a lady, a widow, and she received a call. That's when the Nigerian scam was real big, and she received a call from Nigeria that this man had won some money, and he'd won $350 million, but he needed $3,500 to pay the taxes on it, or he would be glad to give you $350,000. And what she did, this is the huge mistake, she said, oh, my dad was in Nigeria after World War II. The U.S. government sent him over there to build orphanages and schools. And that was the opening this guy needed. And don't you know, he said, oh, I went to that orphanage, or I went to that school, or my dad knew your dad, or we're end up being relatives. But these guys are good. She lost all of her savings, and the banker kept telling her it's a scam, it's a scam, it's a scam. But the thing is, it's her money. Then she took a second out on her house, and she lost it. And she died broke. And the banker's, pretty sure that she died because she lost everything. So that's why you don't want to play with these guys. They might get some information out of you that you don't want them to have.
I'll have a hamburger, for which I will gladly pay you Tuesday.
Sure, remember that one? Now, one of the first cases I went out on was a lady that had come into the sheriff's office. She wanted to know where the VIN number was on a Mercedes-Benz. And Sandy, who's a volunteer, said, well, why do you want to know that? She said, well, I won a Mercedes. I won the American Publishers Clearinghouse, and I won $950,000 in a cashier's check from Wells Fargo. And she said, I've already been to Wells Fargo to see how long it would take for a check to clear. If it was made on their bank, and they said, oh, about an hour. So she said, now I'm coming over here because I also won a Mercedes. And I just want to check where the VIN number is so I can make sure it's not stolen, that it's a good vehicle. So she's thinking, You know, and Sandy's at the front desk saying, oh, this sure sounds like a scam, this sure sounds like a scam. No, no, it's not a scam. These guys are for real. I know they're for real. Well, the sergeant that helped me put this together heard her talking, and she poked her head around the corner and said, hey, can you tell me that again? So she did. And Sergeant Dern said, you might want to be real careful because that sure sounds like a scam. And she said, oh, no, no. She said, I've prayed about it and I feel real good about it. So what the sergeant did is she shot me an email with her name and address. So the next day I happened to be on patrol, and when we got done with our work, I said, let's go and I'll take this information to this lady about scams, okay? So I walked up to her door, she let me in. She had some big sliders she had right there in her kitchen. And she let me in, and I talked to her. I was probably in there for 30 minutes. And she kept saying, no, no, this is real, this is real. Well, I did get it out of her that she'd already given them $1,000. Because they're real good. You know, I need to do this paperwork, I need an attorney for this, I need $350 here. They always have something they need money for. And she said, I'm sure they're coming. They couldn't come today because it was the 4th of July. And she said the ports were closed and they couldn't get the car through the port because, you know, which is just, they're really, really good liars, and they are smooth. When I got ready to leave, I just looked her in the eye and I pointed my finger right at her and I said, don't you dare give him any more money. And she said, oh, okay, I won't give him any more money. And I was walking down the driveway, and Sergeant Dern had pulled up, and she was walking up the driveway. So we both kind of turned around and looked at her, and her slider door was open, and she was looking at us, and she kind of cocked her head, and she said, wow, you guys are serious, aren't you? And I said, yeah. And Marcia said, well, she called me the next day, and she said, Lou, have you heard anything? And I said, no. It was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So I called about 5. And she said, well, they called me at 9 o'clock in the morning, and they wanted $10,000. And I told them I didn't have $10,000. And they said, and these people are foul-mouthed, they are rude, they are loud, and they really started using some obscenities with her. And loud, they said, oh, it's your fault. My manager's going to be so mad at me now, and it's all your fault, and I'm in trouble. And he finally said, well, how much do you have? And she said, I thought I'd just play with them. Don't play with these guys. They're very, very dangerous because they will get some kind of information out of you, and then they'll use it against you. She said, I'll give you $100. Well, I have to go to my manager and see if it's okay. And finally she hung up. And she said, oh, I had such big plans for that money. I was going to help my kids do this, and I was going to help my friends do this. And she said, I'm just so despondent. I was going to help so many people. And I said, let me tell you what, you're going to help people because I'm going to tell them your story. And then maybe they won't have to go through what you went through. These sleazeballs are masters of emotions. And what they go after is your heart. And they like to just take your heart and they like to just rip it out. That's what they're really good at. This being taken advantage of in a scam is no sign of intelligence, because what they're after is emotion. And if they can get you emotional, you're not thinking. Emotions are the enemy of critical thinking. Remember that. So if you can just stop and think, you're better off. And remember, as we age, we have social filters that diminish. It's harder for us to tell who's good and who's bad, who's going to hurt us, who's not going to hurt us, who's going to help us. You know, we want to believe the world's a great place. It's utopia. Well, there's some bad guys out there, so we still have to be aware. Also, our decision-making capabilities lessen. And what these guys are really, really good at is pressure. And when they say, Grandma, I'm in Mexico City and I'm in trouble right now, I'm in trouble right this minute, and I need $2,800 or I'm going to be put in jail and I'm going to be there for 2 weeks before I can even go to court. Please go get $2,800 right now from the bank and come back in an hour and I'll tell you what to do with it. Well, you know, that's scary. And they don't want you to think. That's why they are pressuring you. And if somebody pressures you, if you find anybody pressuring you, back away. If they can't wait for 24 hours or 48 hours, you don't want to do business with them. Also, here's a story of a banker in town, and she's still working. She's still a manager of a bank. And she said she had her grandkids one weekend. And she was trying to get them to go, I don't know where they were, but they had to get on their backpacks and their coats, and she was trying to get them in the car, and her phone rang and she picked it up. This is security from Chase Bank, and we have just detected a charge on your account. We wanted to make sure it was you. It was $495 from this company, and she said, no, that wasn't me. And they said, well, you know, we didn't think it was because we've been following this company, and we think it's a fraudulent company. And we'll take that off your bill right now. My badge number is this. Here's an 800 number that you can call me if you have any questions. I would like to verify that you have both credit cards in your possession. So she looked at her credit card. Yes, she had hers. Yes, her husband had his. And he said, great. And he read off the credit card number. He had the correct credit card number. And then he said, now just to make sure, I would like the 3 numbers on the back of the security. And do you know, she did it. She wasn't thinking, she was in a hurry. He caught her, he gave her all the correct information. Boy, she hung up and she called Chase and said, hey, I've just gotten taken. So that's how fast it happens. We are all vulnerable to this. We had a retired SAV gentleman that was telling, he was so embarrassed. He was telling me he was home one morning and he got a phone call from an attorney. And this is an attorney that is representing his son. His son had been picked up for drunk driving in Maine. And he needed $3,500 as a retainer, or else his son was going to be put in jail and he wouldn't be able to get out on bail. And so, you know, you go right down to the bank. He went down to the bank. The bank said, have you called your son? No. You know, and he wouldn't even listen. But he wired it out and it was gone. The next day, the same attorney called and said, oh, you know what? We need a little more money because now his case is really complicated. Well, boom, he hung up because overnight he had time to think. Now this attorney was in Maine. His son lives in Florida. And he thought, you know, well, maybe he's on vacation. I don't know. But why not call them first before you send the money? I had a lady one day and she called and she said, oh, she came so close to losing this money. But her husband is an Alzheimer's patient, so she is occupied anyway in her head. And her grandson called and said, Grandmother, I'm in such trouble. I've been caught with some drugs, and I need $1,800 right now. Could you please go to the bank and get it for me? I have an hour. If you'll go to the bank and get that money, and then we'll call you back in an hour and tell you what to do with it. So she fixed her husband, and she got him secured, and then she ran to the bank. And the banker said, now what are you doing with it? You know, could we ask you what you're doing with this cash? And she said, well, my grandson called. And the banker said, have you called your grandson? And she said, no. They said, well, why don't you call your grandson? So she got her phone out. It didn't have enough power to call her grandson. So the bank gave her their phone. And she called her grandson. And he said, no, Grandma, that's not me. I wouldn't do anything like that. Oh, she was so ticked off. So when she went home, and they called her within that hour. And she just let them have it, just ripped them up one side and down the other. And I'll guarantee you, she won't fall again, and it probably won't fall her, but she's not going to fall for it again. If you have one of these 3 methods of communication, you are a target. If you have a phone, get the U.S. mail, or a computer, you are a target.